صوتنا بنرجع بنطلع جينا الغدر راجيك يا دوب ينجم فيك طالبت بالتغيير مشروعياتنا نريد بدون تحديثنا طالبان 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 ناقص حقنا ناقص حقنا
hour, 1 hour, so I will make the best out of it. And we have a lot of stories and a lot of things to share. So let's make the best out of it. And I will start from the end. And I will start with you, Ustazah Rahila. Let's start from the end. What's the take-home message you like this audience to take with them today? What's the most important message you like to deliver?
I think the strong message that I would say for our today's conference program to our audience is that we should build more strong leadership network from all walks of life. Not only politicians, not only activists of high level, but from grassroots to high level. Build network for new normal, for the better change. That's
Yes, the new normal, you said.
the new normal.
What do you mean by that?
More of women in the leadership, meeting the goal of SDG and meeting the goal of all these different frontline conferences, women conferences, that one of the example, for example, says, I think the Prime Minister of Italy said, do we meet on 2077 the target of ministerial positions or not? And I think not.
Yeah.
If we do know that we do not, how can we increase again from all walks of lives to build more stronger network and to see the exchange, the co-working together from one country to another country? I would say more and more Middle East and Asian countries as well, because there are a lot of similarities and differences. That is what I would cross message.
You have an amazing story as an activist and as a social worker and as a humanitarian in Afghanistan for the Afghanis, and also as an Afghani living outside Afghanistan. What were the main challenges facing you as a woman activist and as an Afghani woman that at one point had to leave her country and be outside her home?
Yeah. I think most of you, at least you know from the news, Afghanistan context. And women in Afghanistan, at today's Afghanistan, that they are banned from education, from work, from all freedoms.
We are talking basics.
That all the basic rights that the women should practice, unfortunately, they are banned. But also, normally in Afghanistan, being an activist is not a normal job, normal work that you perform. Let me give you my own example that in my journey of activism, how I have been attacked several times. Knowing that all these other challenges that you are warned by telephone call and you have been insulted in some ways as a grassroots activist, but also I was 4 months pregnant when my home was attacked by gunmen, and my husband was nearly to be killed. It was 1998. My children was locked for many years inside home. And my 2 sons was locked for 2 years to have home-based teachers, not to go to school because they were supposed to be kidnapped. My second son was almost to be kidnapped, and he was injured in a very bad ways, and I was in the wedding of my cousin. Anyway, the story is a little bit emotional. But luckily he knew karate, so he defended because there was a arm gun, like, I don't know what is the name, so they were beating her, but he was trying to defend himself, and he went to the top of the building, of 3-floor building, and everything he put off from his pocket, and he jumped from the 3rd floor to the ruin style, because the building was a ruined building, cultural building. And then he was running to the big market so that he's not being kidnapped. That was the time that I thought that I have to leave the country. Yeah. But this was through my work, not only at the grassroots level, but also from the grassroots to policy level. But I was thinking to take you to some of the achievements that I had. Maybe it will be, at least for the young generation, it will be a good experience to be shared. So that why I was attacked, why all this happened. And if I give you the one example of my work, in 1995, I was Women Program Officer, and then I was in charge of the community development on the whole. And I found the community forum, which was started from the village, led by women. And in 2 years, this program, as a community development program, became very famous, because I had the opportunity to as a community development officer in UN Habitat, and UN Habitat had a very vague phrase of social recovery and physical rehabilitation with flexible path. And I used this opportunity to see that, okay, nothing else, so I had open hand and used my creativity. So when I established this community forum, all of a sudden within the UN families, there was a rumor that, oh, what is this community for development? There are more women and so on and so forth. Then within the UN Habitat program, they replicated this to seven provinces. Then Taliban came. So 1998, Taliban came to North Afghanistan, because I started from North Afghanistan. And so there were 25,000 of women, and mostly women were leading the program. And then in this circumstances, they survived, and then transitional government came. When transitional government came, they said, oh, there is a program of community forum that women led, and it survived during the Taliban even. Maybe we should replicate this program. This program replicated nationally to Afghanistan. And it was replicated to 25,000 villages of Afghanistan and 364 districts. We know that when the program is moving gradually and at a small basis, it's more beautiful and more organic and more leading and decision-making more by women. But when it was, it was a bit, there are lots of gaps in the big program, but still, honestly, the program then was called NSP, National Solidarity Program, so the name was changed by the government. But still, this NSP program, because of the women engagement, is one of the famous programs of Afghanistan in the development arena.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Tara. I'm very happy to finally meet you. We know each other from this faraway screens. Of course, the Iranian revolution and what's happening in Tehran has brought back women activism and activism for women's rights back to the spotlight. As an American journalist and writer coming from Iran, how do you see all this? From what perspective you see what's happening in Iran for Iranian women and for women in general?
Thank you. I'm going to be a producer for a second, because that's my job, and I'm going to put this on the other side so you can actually talk. Mazen. Well, first of all, I just want to thank everyone, including Madame Shiriak and everyone in Jordan for participating. I have to say, Jordanians and the people in this region in general have such a special place in my heart, partly because as an Iranian American journalist, I can't go back to Iran just because of my work, but I feel welcome to other countries in the neighborhood, and it's as close as I can get to my own homeland. So thank you so much for having me. It's really a privilege to be talking about the people of Iran, and that's really what I'm hoping to focus on. You mentioned the protests that erupted back in September and are in many ways, in various shapes and forms, continuing. Now, these protests right now may not be on the streets of Iran, but in this country, even dreaming is a form of resistance and protest, and it reflects the abundance desire by ordinary Iranians, ordinary people, ordinary women and girls and young men who want change. And Mazen, you know this, but other folks may not know, I was born and raised in Iran. I was born toward the end of the Iran-Iraq war, and I lived there until I was 18. And so I would say, I spent quite a bit of time in that country, and I was lucky enough to be back and forth until my father passed away. And that's when I started to work as a professional American journalist, right? And that was the decision. It was quite deliberate, because I chose to do journalism as a form of public service, to tell stories that the rest of the world may not know of our region, but also Iran. Because the first thing I recognized as an immigrant was how little my American friends and counterparts know about me. They know nothing about Iranians, right? And I'm so curious, even in this room, if I ask how many of you have Iranian friends, or how many of you have been to Iran, or how much do you know about Iran? Probably it's not much, right? And it's not your fault, because the narrative is so insular and focused on the politics and the government and this rogue regime that is the Islamic Republic, and so little on the people, right? And so coming back to your question about the protests that we saw, the many millions of Iranian people who took the streets across the nation were a reflection of the passion and resilience and strength and potential of the Iranian people. And one of the things that I often share in my talks is that Iran is a country of 80 million ordinary people rather than 80 million nuclear heads. And there's a whole world of distinction in that, and if only we get to know that, and if we only humanize the people of our countries, of Afghanistan, Lebanon, Iraq, Libya, Egypt, Syria, if we only humanize the people of our countries, we have the ability to have those people connect with the rest of the world. And that's the power of storytelling and journalism that I wanted to pursue, and I tried to do in my book. And again, I mentioned my love for Jordanians. I'm just so grateful that Prince Zaid Rad Al Hussein, he was kind enough to write the foreword to my book. And the reason I wanted someone from the Arab world to share his or her thoughts in the preface of this book was to emphasize the common grounds that we have as Iranians with those in our neighborhood. And if only we see that, we can achieve so much. And so the girls and boys you saw on the streets of Tehran and again, across the country, from Sistan, Baluchistan to Kurdistan to the northern provinces, their hopes and dreams and aspirations and fears are exactly the same as the hopes and dreams and aspiration and fears of boys and girls in Afghanistan, in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, and elsewhere in this region. Yeah. And if we focus on those hopes and dreams and common grounds and similarities, is when we're going to achieve the collective goals that we have.
We know the iconic face of the Iranian revolt which is a feminine face. And sometimes it has been called the feminine revolution. But is this issue a big part of the uprising now in Iran? Does it matter when it comes to fundamental issues being unsolved in a society? Is the gender issues or women's rights a fundamental part of this big change that people dream of?
You know, I think we in the Western media love to, categorize revolutions and label things and make things look sexy and exciting and have sound bites. So, yes, in many ways we can call this a feminist revolution, but in its entirety, this is the calling of the entire country. This is the calling of the young people in Iran who want change, who want freedom, who want to break free. And the spark of it was the unfortunate killing of Mahsa Jina Amini, right? Yeah. And so the face became this feminist face. But the issue is so much more complex, and it encompasses the entirety of the Iranian people's longing for change, right? And part of this desire is, of course, the perpetual denial of the Islamic regime of the rights of the women in this country, right? And we have to remember that one of the first things that the Islamic regime did in 1979 was to forcefully put this hijab back on the head of women, right? And we need to go deeper. We need to understand that Iran has been, a Muslim country for many years, right? And even during pre-1979 revolution, people could wear the hijab, right? But it was their choice. And I wrote this in one of my articles that I hope it answers your question right now, is that people are risking their lives on the streets, both women and men, not because they're longing to wear mini skirts or short dresses. No, because they want to choose for themselves. Whatever that choice is, they are risking it all for the ability to choose whatever they want to do in their life. So yes, women and girls have played a huge part of it, but it's a categorical call for change by the entire nation, which again continues to this day.
Madame Rahila says about this that women empowerment is not only the end by itself, it's also the essential component of any sustainable development in societies. Russia, coming to you from this, we're talking about protests, women leading protests, but at the same time, any protest, if it was not accompanied by academic and intellectual uplifting, it will be just unheard voices in the street. Where is your role here? What role can people like you play in really showing the real picture of what's happening and the transformations happening in those societies?
Thank you so much, and thank you Ms. May for the invitation. It's a very important question. I'm going to be echoing a lot of what my esteemed colleague said before me. Storytelling is very important. Now, before I did storytelling in journalism, I did political analysis. I do not recommend it. It's very depressing. Also, mostly just men, very few women in that field. So that is something that does need to change. But one element of political analysis was how little of the context of the countries that we're from that are known, even to the policy-making circles. Now, these are people in Washington, D.C., in London, who are making decisions that are basically setting the destiny for our nations, our people, and they don't know what's going on. They don't know what's happening. So I come in here, and this is where the sort of activist in me kind of jumps in. I can no longer be completely unbiased. I have to come in and bring what I know, my knowledge of the region of Iraq in particular, to the table, and we can start the discussion from there. As I switched to storytelling and journalism, it's very much the same. I think all of us and all the countries in the region, Jordan, Egypt, Syria, the Gulf countries, also Gulf in particular, we have a lot of journalists, and this is not to take a jab at anyone. I respect, of course, everyone in the field. But you cannot simply come to a country for 1 week and claim to know everything about it, especially if it's such a complex society and community. And then we see these essays and we see these articles about Iran, Afghanistan, and I think Afghanistan is the model that sticks with me the most because following the collapse of the state and as the Taliban took over, so many articles came out saying, oh, the Taliban have progressed. They're not as bad. They're actually very progressive now. They're supporting women. And the women in Afghanistan are saying, no, that's not the case. Don't trust them. We've been here before. We know how they're going to change. We know how they're going to revert to their old ways. But when a Western journalist comes and says, no, I've sat with the Taliban. They're very nice to me. And they were very respectful. So I think we need to look at this differently. And they would ignore the local voices. This is also when the activist kind of kicks in, and you see women from Afghanistan, women from Iran talking back and saying that's not the case. And this is where my role comes in. Now it's a very, very thin line between activism and journalism, because as journalists, as writers, we're supposed to convey the truth, regardless of what we feel. I find that very hard to believe and find that impossible. I think that you cannot be unbiased. If you are completely unbiased without emotion, that's kind of psychopathic. That's not normal. As human beings...
That's ChatGPT.
There you go. That's ChatGPT, yes. You have to have some kind of emotion. If it's your country and your region, even more. But also, there's a basic line of human rights. You don't have to be an activist to know that the people and the women of Afghanistan deserve education, that the people of Iran deserve freedom, the people of Iraq deserve to live without war for once, or conflict. The people of Lebanon deserve to live without corruption and indignity. You don't even need to be an activist, just acknowledge basic human rights. So, as my colleague was saying, Tara here, because we're not humanized. Those of us in the region, especially from countries that have been through conflict, we're statistics, we're numbers. We hear from 2003, nearly 1 million Iraqis have died, or in one attack, 70 Iraqis were killed today. Can anyone name one of them? Has a name of a victim ever been mentioned in an article written by a non-Middle Eastern person? Never. It's when women in particular in journalism started taking roles in some of the big channels, in some of the big newspapers and outlets, that's when we started hearing the names. The first article on Atwar Behjat was written by a woman. And every time, and that's when we first heard the name. And every time there is a name or a story being told, there is an element from the region coming in.
And here's the biggest challenge is you don't have to look only for the sexy stories. You have to look for the real stories, stories of that matter. And here comes the role of alternative or independent journalism.
Yes. So for independent journalism, funding is always an issue. So you need to find a source of funding that doesn't have a political agenda, but is very interested in the truth. Now that, of course, is very hard, but once you have that, you kind of stick to it and make the best out of it. Through storytelling, as Tara was saying, the humanizing element is very important, because it comes a time when a Westerner reads the story, you have to create some kind of analogy, something that they can relate to. Personally, in all the stories that I wrote, I always go back to pop culture.
Yeah.
I use an American reference, something within the movies, something within the media. I was trying to explain, for example, the complexities of the network of Muqtada Sadr. Most of us have heard of him, at least. And I found it very hard to explain that element of the militias, so I reverted to the American TV show The Wire, if anyone has watched it. It's all about gangs in Baltimore, and I compared the two. And even the writer of the TV show said that's a very interesting analogy. I'd never considered it, but it helped me understand what was going on in Iraq at the moment. So we can find ways to convert, and then people start realizing Iraqis, Iranian, Afghans, they're all like Lebanese. They're all like us. We're very similar.
Being someone who analyzes and studies political Islam, militias, where is the problem, and what's the correlation between this word, this part of, I know this is like, it's an endless discussion, but really if you want to put it like in 2 sentences, what's the problem of this region? What's the problem?
Oh, I can't, that's a PhD dissertation. That's not I can't answer that in 2 sentences. Corruption, I would say at this moment in time where we are right now, is probably the biggest issue.
Corruption?
Yes. Because corruption stops progress, and it doesn't allow for problem solving.
Can I interject, if that's okay, and answer maybe a bit of that question? Is you ask what the problem is, and I think part of the problem is that the focus of the media tends to only be on the rogue actors, right? And the minute that the outside voices, whether it be journalists or activists or members of the civil society start talking about people and individuals, they fail to understand the difference between humanizing and normalizing. Okay?
Yeah.
If I focus on talking about Iranian people and their struggles, it doesn't mean that I'm normalizing the challenges that exist in that country, or I'm justifying the existence or behavior of the government. And that is true anywhere, right? And I think that's a failure of us in the media, civil society activists, to not push hard enough to distinguish between normalizing and humanizing.
We will come back to that, and also I will ask you about the demarcation line between being an activist and a journalist. Where do you draw this very thin line? حياتي شو عبالك اسألي؟ اسألي نفسك وجاوبي.
طيب أنا I'll take the no, I'm not going to go easy.
عربي إنجليزي أو أرمني؟
أرمني، عربي، إنجليزي، الفرنساوي هلا ببريكسل عم بحكي فرنسي، ببريكسل عم تلغي الفرنساوي كمان يعني إذا
بس في مطالبة إنه نكفي إنجليزي.
English, yes. So I'll take the hard question, which is what is lacking in the region.
So my question to you is, where do you stand? Where do you stand from this discussion, and do you agree that corruption is the main or the major problem towards the whole, if you look at it from a bigger picture, towards the whole problem, including women's rights issues?
Definitely, like corruption is one element of the problems that we are facing, but not the only problem. So today, I think if we want to go back a bit in the history of the Arab world, because it's important to discuss about where the Arab world is going, because what we're seeing is like there are kind of transformations, but at the same time, I feel that we missed an opportunity after the many independences in this region to really, for the countries that took their independence, to really work on their societies and what kind of societies they want and how to develop these societies and modernize them. So we were stuck in the same structures that were created by the international community at that time, by the British, by the French, and later by the Americans. And we missed the opportunity to really look at the society and see the differences and advancing the society. And then because we were unable to do that, we were stuck in what is called like lack of democracy, like where you want, there is one leader that thinks that he knows how a society should be run. And then we went into this kind of where the leaders of the region are taking the legitimacy from abroad and not from their societies. And this has been really a big issue. And then they had to come up with like a structure in the country to keep their leadership and their legitimacy. So they went into corruption and this state capture where you have an elite that is close to the leadership, that is corrupt and that is being like fed by corruption. So basically taking the resources of the country for their own without really thinking of the development of the country. And we see this mostly in all of the countries of the region. And that's why we're stuck in a region today, unfortunately, from Algeria, or if you want, from Morocco, till the last country in the Gulf country, where we do have problems. Like in every country, we do have problems, and their understanding of what is modernizing or what is progress, etc., on the country. It's really sad to see what's happening in the region. Like when you see that you have countries that are failed countries, failed states, you have war, you have interstate wars about specific issues, and then, but at the same time, you're seeing something that is kind of, I don't know how to call it, but something amazing that is happening in front of our eyes. What's happening in Saudi Arabia, this transformation of a whole society that is happening. And us as analysts and those who were working on everything related to politics and economy, we always used to say that the countries that rely on resources, on oil and gas, cannot be sustainable. They need to create another economy, diversify the economy. And this is exactly what today we are seeing Saudi Arabia is doing, diversifying its economy and working on its society. And this transformation that is happening today in Saudi Arabia should have happened years ago everywhere in the Arab world. So it doesn't matter if one country or two countries are doing okay, and the rest are not doing okay. It's because the whole region is not doing okay. So there is something missing in this cake, and that's why whatever we are trying to bake now for the coming years, it's not going to be right because there are missing ingredients, which is, and this to link it to the women and the freedom of women. It goes back to the choice of, I choose what I want to wear, I choose how I want to bathe, I have the freedom to choose what how I want to work and manage my body. So the moment you are not allowing the single person to do that, so then you are really breaking the whole spirit of a society. You cannot. You have to let people live their freedom so that you have development. Without the freedom, you don't have development.
But when the whole society is not free, whose priority is women freedoms or women issues? Is it a priority when looking at the bigger picture now with corruption, with everything wrong happening? Is women rights issues a priority? Whose priority is that? Why it's a priority? And then I would like to share this question with you all. Do you consider yourself an activist or a woman activist?
So let me tell you, so for me, it's like I am aware that I am a woman. I identify as a woman until now, 2023. بكرة ما بعرف.
Thank you for letting me know. I will be prepared for any surprises.
So I am aware that I'm a woman. That's why whatever I do, there's always this consciousness of being a woman, and that there is a cause for advancing women causes in the region. It is not normal to have women being dictated what to do, what to wear, how to feel, whom to love, how to love, all of that, and whom to vote to, and how to act in politics, if she's allowed to be in politics or not, if she's allowed to be in certain... why now we're pushing, we want women in science? We want women in science, we want women in politics as well. We want women everywhere to play their role. They are part of that single understanding of the human rights, and countries that are based on human rights and countries that believe in rights should not be putting away like the rights of women or deciding that it is not the right time. It's not a choice of today I choose women's right and tomorrow I don't, or today we have an economic issue. But part of the economic collapse is because you have half of the society which is not able to really play a role in the economy. So whatever you do, it's like there is a role for women to play, and you cannot have a development in a country. You cannot progress if women are not really progressing with you. So you will end up like having a crippled society.
Unfortunately, I have only 7 minutes left, and we will take questions. But the one common denominator between the four of you, coming from Afghanistan, Iran, Lebanon, and Iraq, of course you have many things in common, but what really strikes me is that the four of you or your families, decided to fled your countries. You left Afghanistan because you were threatened and you were afraid to lose your family. Your parents left Iran for hundreds of reasons that they felt they wanted to give you a better future. Lori has left Lebanon and she is living in Europe. She left her husband and went to Europe. And also, you or your family, you left Iraq. I will start from you, Rasha. You think there is no place for people like you in your countries?
Speaking from personal experience, at this time and place, no, just because of the security situation. It doesn't mean that in the future that might not change. But right now, I'm by far more useful alive in my place in Washington, D.C., at least writing what I write and doing what I do, than I would be if I went back to Mosul and probably not survive for a week. that would be my answer.
And you identify yourself today as American, Iraqi?
Oh, I'm not American. I have a permanent residency card, but I'm fully,
Okay.
my only passport is
Mostly.
Iraqi. I'm Mosuli, yes, mostly.
Yeah. That's what you feel you are,
Yes.
exactly. Lori, being
Yes.
being the head of a political party that was a success story in Lebanon, and you took the decision that you and your family, that all of us are now moving to another country. No place like you in Lebanon?
Look, the decision was not easy, but because like struggle is very tiring, and you need to keep the momentum of struggling, because it's like it's a continuous battle. It doesn't stop. So you need sometimes to take a break. And I felt that I would be more, I would have more impact or more influence or be more of use if I left the country a bit to breathe, to look back at what has happened, and to really like think of the future and be of help from outside. So one thing that is happening very interestingly in the country, and I don't know in many other countries maybe, the struggle, because we're always struggling in the country. After the independence, and then after 1990 with the end of the civil war, it has been continuous battle for a better country, and it has taken many shapes. So it's a continuous battle. Sometimes you need to leave, take a break, and leave the fresh blood that is in the country to work. And what's interesting as well, we're seeing people that are living abroad, Lebanese living abroad, coming in now with that fresh energy that they have. So it's kind of, I'm tired, I need to go breathe a bit, but there are people that are coming back because they're full of energy, and they feel that they can have the fight, continue the fight, they're fighting it. And it's a kind of good recycling of politics and activism and fight for the sake of the country. So if I'm in Brussels, doesn't mean that I don't care about the country. On the contrary, now I'm using my power in Brussels to really pinpoint at everything that is happening. And like as Rasha said, for the Europeans to understand exactly what is happening in the country, and not for their own analysts to say what's happening in my country. I know better than what the analysts that are living in Brussels, and therefore I want to write the narrative of my country and not them writing it. وبعدين one more thing, this is the last thing I want to say. It's very important لأنه we're all battling with finances and funding, and we're saying alternative media need funding, etc. The intelligent thing, the smartest thing that the EU or the US does, it's like they are these funds where they fund projects, conferences, alternative media, etc. And therefore, they are kind of their agenda. What is missing in the Arab world, it's like we are not able to create our own narrative because we're not finding that fund that is not completely like what you want. No, I give you the money, but you have to praise me ليل ونهار. يا خيي, I don't want to praise you ليل ونهار, but you have to create the fund in the Arab world to be able for the people of this region to write their own narrative. وإلا we are going to be really in a very, very difficult position where we are always forced to take the narrative that the outsider is giving to the region. The region needs to have its voices heard, the narrative and the history that we want to write. So for the people that have the money, they need to create a fund to help these things without that Arabic mentality of Kidon or Don, but to the extreme that goes to the extreme, so that we do write our history.
Mrs. Rahila, you also had another perspective about the donor communities and the challenges facing this relationship between the donors and the local NGOs. So what do you say about that?
I think we should not wait for the donor when there is when there's emergency, for example. If I give you example of collapse in Afghanistan, and I saw that so much crowd of Afghan refugees, women refugees, professional in neighboring country, I just started with empty hand, honestly. It is capitalizing of the human resources, the knowledge, mobilization of knowledge and human resources, that's money, that's invested. And then the donor community should come to you as a woman in the front line to listen to yourself, not to listen to them as a dictator. they have to learn from us that, okay, what will work better and how it will work. That is what will be my suggestion. Also, the donor need to understand, and also us as an activist, that any work we do in development aspects, understanding the development aspect, has to be evolutionary, organic, and also to institutionalize it.
They have to know that you know better on the ground.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. We all know that bottom-up approach is the best, and organic approach and evolutionary is much more, and also to see that, okay, where it will end. Will it stay for, like, I'm doing training and running? No. How this person that I wanted her as a 16 or 18 years old to be the leader, the capable leader of future, to institutionalize it.
Yeah.
To mentor, to coach, to follow up, to see where has she been from here and where is she in 10 years.
Yeah.
So it's a double responsibility for the activist when there's disaster, when there's emergency, and when there's need for more,
Tara, I will give you the final word. I have very quick questions. First, what's written on your T-shirt? Let me like, what is it?
Zan Zendegi Azadi, An-Nisa, life, woman, life, freedom, because I think that's something that we can all resonate with. And how do you say it in Arabic? Say it in Arabic? How do you
say it?
Zan Nisa, Zendegi Hayat. Help me, it's all right.
Nisa, Hayat, Hurriya.
Hurriya. There we go. Yes. Yes, and that's actually a good segue, perhaps, to share my final thoughts, and that is, as a journalist, I truly believe in the power of storytelling, and this is what I started to talk about. And not to correct you, Zavin, but my family didn't flee Iran. My parents were in the U.S. in the 60s, in the late 60s, but unlike the sort of conventional narrative and the conventional story, my father decided to go back to Iran during the Iran-Iraq War. He was a surgeon, and he wanted to go back to serve his country. As much as he hated the mullahs and the ayatollahs, he said, I got my education, but I want to go back to my homeland and to my roots, right? And when it came to go to college, I chose to leave, and that's a privilege that I had, right? Therefore, I chose the responsibility to be a journalist, an American journalist, and risk, everything, and give up the ability to freely go to my homeland, right? And that's the price that I paid. And the prices that we all pay looks different. That price for you looks different, for you looks different, for me looks different, and for you looks different. Some flee, some don't, some live there and fight the fight, right? But fundamentally, at the end of the day, it is our responsibility, all of us, to tell our own story. Because I believe if we don't tell our own story, someone else would tell that story for you. And that story may be one that's not accurate, nor one that, you don't like. Right? And so that's the power in journalism, and amplifying the voices of people. In my case, we saw the power of the collective of Iranian people and their voices, but it shouldn't stop there. We just saw a glimpse of the potential that exists in this country of 80 million. So let's amplify that. There's absolutely no difference between a 16-year-old teenager in Jordan or Lebanon or Iraq or Syria and in Iran. And if only we amplify those common grounds, is that we're gonna see change.
And would you identify yourself today as an American journalist, or American Iranian journalist, or Iranian journalist, or
I think another
or also a journalist or an activist?
I actually teach a class where I talk about the stark differences between journalism and activism, but I think at its core, if you want to do both, you need to do it with empathy and also strong understanding of the nuances and isms that exist in whatever country that you're covering. And really that's the reason I wrote The Heartbeat of Iran, which, I wanted to read a short, tiny paragraph at the end. I know we're out of time, but I spent 3 years doing this book, Zavin, not because, you know, I was getting funding or because I was going to make a lot of money writing a book. Please don't write a book to make money, because that's not going to happen. But because it was a responsibility, right? It was a public service, because that's how I look at journalism, okay? Because I saw the lack of humanized storytelling on ordinary Iranian people that the world knows nothing about. Your country should not be defined by its government. Lebanon should not be defined by Hezbollah. Syria should not be defined by, you know, the regime that governs it right now. Iran should not be defined on the international stage by Khamenei or the Islamic revolution, or Afghanistan should not be defined by the Taliban. Countries should be defined by their people. And if I may, thank you. I think this is something that I like to leave, you know, the audiences with, if I can, because I quite truly believe it's something that we can all share. It's, governments come and go, presidents change, regimes collapse, but what will forever remain is the pulse of the people who pump blood into the veins of their land. People who, in my case, are the heartbeat of Iran.
Nice.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, audience. I'm sorry I couldn't take questions, but probably I hope there will be more opportunities to talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just want to say my great thanks to Dr. May Shiadik for your excellent leadership and all your team to make this happen, to all leaders to come together. Thank you.
Thank you.